Imagine if every time you were like, I want to do this specialty, and instead of the response being, it was very competitive. Imagine if you had a Michelle Leach and every person was like, okay, just follow your true north. Just make sure you're following your true north. Oh, how different would that be?
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Beck.
And I am Christine Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Dr. Beck is a mindset coach and medical doctor who specialises in liberating driven, professional women from the limitations of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people pleasing. She's basically the cheat code for getting out of your own way, showing up authentically, and living a life you're proud of.
And Christine is a medical educator and nephrologist who creates resources for doctors in training that I truly think are an unfair advantage. She makes complex topics super simple and takes the pain and uncertainty out of passing your medical exams. Christine and I connected a few years ago via our online platforms, and over the years we've discussed countless highs, lows, and in-betweens of doctor life. And in doing so, we've experienced firsthand the power of vulnerable conversations to show us where we're getting in our own way and underestimating our capacity.
So we want you to be part of the conversation and experience these same results. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors.
Hello, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to our channel, our podcast today, Am I Doing It Wrong? So Christine has just told me about this amazing video series she's just released on YouTube. And guys, I want to delve into more about it today so I can pick Christine's brain. It is about how to get the job that you want in medicine. We're talking about medical specialties here. So she's done a 3-part series on medical, you tell me, Christine, so I don't.
Yeah, so it's a 3-part series on medical job applications. So there's some stuff in there about cover letters, how to talk about research, and whether you like or don't like research, like what I think you should say in your interviews and your cover letters. And then the last episode is about applying for competitive positions, which is one of my most passionate areas that I love talking about to trainees. So yeah, so that's the series. So you could definitely check that out. I'm sure it'll help you with your job applications if you're in that season.
Yes, what a great resource that people can go and tap into. Thank you so much for creating it. What really captured my attention was the competitive training applications. Can we focus on that one today? And can you please tell us why this is so close to your heart?
Oh my goodness. Yes, Beck, this is so close to my heart. So I have been in so many situations, and I'm sure we can all relate to this. You might even be listening at home and saying this exact same thing to yourself, right? But how many times have you asked, or I've certainly asked trainees, what is it you want to do with your life? Which specialty are you going to apply for? And they'll inevitably say something like, I'd love to be a gastroenterologist, but it's very competitive, or oh, my CV's just not up to scratch. And they start placing these limitations on themselves. And my instant reaction is, no, that is not the attitude to have. That is not the attitude to have. So I find it completely heartbreaking that trainees do that. And I think some of that is to do with my own story. Quite honestly, since the beginning of time, basically med school is competitive to get into, but then once you're in, you're in for sort of 5-6 years. But every single thing I've applied for since I left med school, there's always been I'm sure they're well-meaning in trying to protect me from myself, but some well-meaning person's always ready to say, oh, that's competitive. I was moving country and they're like, oh, you'll not get a job in Australia. You shouldn't do that. Even just the basic, your resident jobs and your registrar jobs, and realistically in Australia we're applying for jobs every single year. So basically every single year someone would tell me that I was unlikely to get a job, and because I was from overseas I wasn't on the usual match and all the things. And so along the way what I've really learned is that there's always someone who's willing to tell you that you're not able to do something or you're not the right fit without knowing much about you generally. And if I had listened to those people and not gone for it and not did the thing, then what would I have missed out on so far? So it breaks my heart to hear Dr. Humans talking about themselves in that way, because honestly I think that those limitations are they shouldn't be there. Like, you know, we're not going to be ballerinas or astronauts or whatever, necessarily basketball players, but if you're a doctor and you want to be a certain type of doctor, I don't see why you can't be that certain type of doctor. You know, there'll be a pathway that leads there, and I think you should go after it. So that's why I made this series, and that's why I'm so lit up about this, because I really I feel really passionate that people shouldn't be putting limitations on us, and we shouldn't be putting limitations on ourselves. Have you ever come across that scenario, Beck, in your own
so
career?
much. That's what, and I mean, this is why I really wanted to talk to you about this, because it's just so relatable. Every single person listening to this has probably had somebody say, "Ooh, that's really competitive." And as you mentioned, people don't say it to be malicious, as they don't say it to be like, that's really competitive and you're not good enough. They're not trying to say that, although that's how we may receive it a lot of the time. And in fact, like, from my coaching background, I would say that most people probably say this really believing that it's true and that it's a problem, like it's a reason to not follow that path unless you're willing to go to some extreme. And that's the problem. People are well-meaning, but not well informed or really thinking about how useful it is to say something like that to people. And then on the other side, receiving that, and I personally have received this multiple times as well, whether it's been somebody telling me directly that, you know, that training pathway is like, are you sure you want to do that? It's a very competitive training pathway. Or even just like, I remember recently overhearing somebody get onto renal, they got onto nephrology, and it was another person sitting next to me, and they were like, oh, isn't that great that person got on? That's a really competitive program. Like, it's just such commonplace language. And I can remember each time I heard it, this sinking in my stomach, and instantly in my head, I'm like, oh, I don't really want to be a part of this rat race. Like, I don't want to be the person who's like doing medicine double, triple, full time and research on the side and blah, blah, blah to have my resume up to scratch or to be competitive for this competitive program. So I think it's a ubiquitous issue and a unquestioned, unvalidated concept.
Yeah, absolutely. But what you were saying there about not wanting to be in the rat race, I think that's also completely valid too. Like, I think if you're true north, you can really tune into yourself and you can say, do you know what? These are my values. This is the life I want to have. I'd probably be happy in XYZ specialty. It doesn't have to be this one. It can be this one. And actually, this one's got a better lifestyle and might even be more aligned. Like, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Like, saying no to the rat race, because the rat race can mean, like what you say, a lot of sacrifice that might interfere with your relationship, your home life, if you've got children and all of those things. It might mean that you have to move geographically, interstate, something like that. Like, the rat race is not always the right path for you. And so I think if you tune into who you are and what you want, you'll never go far wrong. And I think that's completely different. Like, choosing yourself is completely different from not choosing this specialty because you think you're not good enough. I think they're two totally different things.
Is that something you talked about in your video as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was basically a rant from start to finish, the video. A very helpful little rant. Hopefully it's helpful. But yeah, just all of those different options. Like, if you're trying to choose a path, you might choose, I call it choosing yourself, as opposed to choosing the specialty that you deem to be maybe the malaligned path. And I also talk about, if you do go for a specialty that's competitive and maybe you don't get in, some glory stories for how sometimes that even leads you down a better path that was the one it was always meant for you. And I have two examples of some colleagues who just bossed life by not getting into the program, and probably if you had to speak to them now, they would tell you that they're actually glad they didn't get in. So it covers all bases. But I think what I think was super fascinating, because I know that you're a self-doubt coach, and I think it would be great to pick your brain on how people can overcome that self-doubt if they do want to apply for a specialty program and it's so-called competitive. How can they tune into just going after that unapologetically and have that self-belief that it's going to be necessary to sell themselves in the interview, sell themselves in their cover letter? Like, do you have any tips on how you could coach someone through that to gain that self-belief and get out of their own way?
So much, but I just feel like this, it just my sort of mindset side of things could be so well paired with your strategy of understanding how the system works and what those kind of CV points are and what an employer wants to hear you say. And somebody who's been in you're in a leadership position as a consultant in a big teaching hospital, for somebody who knows really what these institutions are looking for. Because, I mean, it's not that you necessarily want to change yourself to present some perfect puzzle piece in the interview of like, oh, you want this? Well, I have this. Here you go. We're a perfect match. But there's so many parts of us that are malleable. Like there are lots of things that we're indifferent about. Like some people are really indifferent about whether they would have research in their future or not, you know. So if you were to understand those bits of strategy that you can offer us, it helps you to know what is high yield to talk about in these short interviews. So that is such a valuable resource to have for all of us to think about. And yet then, from the mindset perspective, when I think about hearing those comments now, and it was easier for me to hear those actually, no, to be fair, I got the sinking feeling, whatever that is. I could explore that. Why does like my stomach sink when I hear people talk about this competitive training program? So that's kind of my initial reaction, the sinking feeling. And it's really interesting to explore your thoughts about that. Why did I get such a strong reaction to that? What am I making that mean? But for me, it was a bit easier because I'd already decided that I wasn't going down that pathway at this time. But, you know, even the people who are on the program, they're not actually qualified to say whether you are adequate to meet those competitive requirements. So what does that actually mean when people say it's a competitive program and ... therefore you shouldn't do it because ... you're not up to scratch? You know what I mean? Who is qualified to say you are fit to apply for this competitive program or not, you know? Which is, I mean, going to come down to the decisions from the selection panel and who understands how the selection panel really think rather than even the people on the program. So that's one thing. Is it competitive? And what does that actually mean? Then is that a problem for you? Is it a problem that I need to do ... because it's competitive? So getting unstuck from that thought that you've taken for granted. And even the rat race, like it's going to be a rat race. That's something that I took for granted when I was working as a BPT in like Melbourne city area. People were talking about the rat race all the time. The rat race. Don't get out of the rat race. And again, what does that mean? What does the rat race mean? Because when I hear the word rat race, sinking feeling like, ugh, no, thank you. I do not want to be a part of that. But questioning that thought, what does it actually mean to be in the rat race? What does that actually look like? Just to step back out of these triggering terms of it being competitive and a rat race and really asking, okay, what does that mean? Is it true? And is it a problem? So there's so much room to move there to be able to make a decision that's less out of like fear of running away from a competitive program or running away from the rat race versus, as you're saying, a decision for you. Because for some of us, being really busy and hustling is still something that we want to do. For some of us, it is. You got to work out whether you're that person, whether you're doing it for the right reasons. So, there's so much in this topic. It is fascinating. And so I'm comfortable with the mindset side, and that's why I'm like, Christine, give us a strategy. So I can't wait to go and watch your videos and hear all the golden nuggets and tips that you're going to give us.
Yeah, and it ties in so well. So even just what you were saying there about the rat race, and you were saying, is that a problem for me? Because when you actually just break down what the rat race means, there are some actionable steps in there. So if you want to be on a certain program, like what you said, a lot of that's going to come down to the professory types who are going to be making those decisions, right? Those heads of units, that selection process. So ultimately, you can go to them and tell them you're interested. This is what you want to do with your life. If there's nothing else you want to do with your life, have that passion. Even if you could do other specialties, don't tell them that. Go straight in and be like, this is the only thing I see myself doing in my whole future. Look committed and find out what you need to do. And you'll probably come out with a list, right? Which is not a rat race, it's now a list. And you can try and attack the list and tick the list, or decide, listen, that list looks like my worst nightmare. I don't want to do the list, and just tune into that and do what feels right to you. Because I think trusting your intuition and your gut feel is always something I would recommend, like always. But I think finding out what the rat race is by finding out what the actionable steps are. And then you'll find in that there's nothing that you can actually do. Like if it's to do a research paper, as much as you may or may not like to do that, you're probably capable of it, right? You're probably capable. And then it's about finding a really good supervisor who's going to make that a really easy process. Research can be really hard or more streamlined, and so finding a really good supervisor that's going to make that pop for you, make it like as easy as possible. But I guess the other sort of thing to do in that process, apart from finding out the list of things that would make you a great candidate, is just the very act of putting yourself forward and making yourself known and allowing yourself to be seen. So the people that I found who did particularly well on the interview circuit had pre-done the work. They had gone for meet and greets with various heads of unit at various places, and that was actually against the rules when I did my application. And that doesn't seem to matter. I would actually suggest that you do reach out and you do meet and greets where you can. The worst that can happen is that they tell you that they don't want to meet you. That's fine, but I would definitely try and make yourself known, show up in person, because you're going to be so much more memorable, you're going to stand out. And then when you're in those spaces, you're going to be taking your CV and your cover letter and making them as sparkly as you possibly can. And in order to do that, you're going to have to do what Beck was talking about and really tune into your own value, what you can actually bring, and back yourself. Because if you can't see your own potential, no one's going to see it for you. And this is something that Beck and I were having a little chat about offline, was in addition to when you're going for jobs, like my experience was I would go for jobs, and before I went for them, people would tell me, oh, it's competitive. But interestingly, I remember when I got onto the renal program, I got in at the Austin Hospital at that time, and they had 5 internal applicants. And I was very grateful to get on. But what was really interesting was afterwards when my referee came up to me and congratulated me for getting the position, but also said to me, oh, but there was 5 internal applicants, like completely confused as to why I got the position in the first place. So even my referee, who had supported my job application, was mystified as to why I was, special enough to get through that barrier. And I'm not saying I'm special or more special than anyone else. I must have sold myself well. I must have believed in myself enough to convince them that I was good enough for that job, right? And your CV and things, and just making that pop and jump out of the page. That must have been the thing, because I don't believe I'm more special than anyone else. But it was just interesting that, this person that I thought I was a good trainee was saying to me that she didn't think I deserved the job. So I think it was just an interesting learning point that we really have to back ourselves. Yes. When you go for a job, you really have to tune in and believe in yourself, and it will come out of you. When you really mean it, when you really truly believe that you're worth it and that you deserve this position, they can sense it. It's energetic. Do you agree?
Well, I'm just thinking, gosh, if that was your supervisor and somebody who would work with you closely, and she or he?
She.
She was senior to you, or she was senior to you. Imagine if the effect on you, if you had known that before, if she had said, there are 5 applicants, so you probably won't get in. And just thinking about how that sentiment from somebody who is more senior and more qualified for you, we put so much emphasis on what they think and them being able to judge us correctly. If she had said that to you before the interview, and then you had to go in with this person who knows better, knowing that you're not good enough, thinking about how that would have affected you is one thing. And then the awareness that in retrospect, she was wrong. She was wrong to think that you weren't good enough or whatever for the job. Isn't that just fascinating? And this, again, like you said before as well, like it's not malicious. These were probably just her genuine thoughts, and she thought she was right. She didn't realize that she could be wrong. We think that we know that we can comment on people's, fitness for the job, or how much another person with subjective views and bias, how they will judge you. But we don't know. We can't read minds. And I'm just so glad that that wasn't able to affect your thoughts before you went in and you backed yourself, because for a lot of us, we would think, well, if this senior person in this position thinks that about me, then they're probably right. And then, you know, for a lot of us, that affects the way we show up, and then you might not have gotten the job because, as you say, backing yourself was necessary for this. It's such a brilliant example.
Yeah, I'm so glad I was ignorant to that. So glad. But I've had lots of experiences like that along the way. I guess I just want to normalize rejection. Like, I think it is healthy to normalize rejection. I remember getting a job. I don't know if I should really mention the person's name, but one of the heads of units, I was walking along the corridor with them one day, and I remember saying something to them about how I got my job or something like that. And I was thinking that it was maybe like someone put in a good word for me from another hospital, like something like that happened. I don't know. That's what I thought had happened. And he turned to me and he said, "That's not what happened. We didn't want you. We wanted someone else. But now you're here. You're okay." So I just want to normalize that. And ultimately, does it matter? No, it does not matter, because I'm on the program, living my best life. Doesn't really matter. It's never held me back. But I just want to normalize that, like, just, and I guess to give everyone that self-reliance and self-belief that, you know, I'm someone who clearly has not impressed every head of unit in Melbourne. I did not get hired by everyone. Like, you know, you just get hired by enough people to get through. You just have to resonate with one or two, and you just have to, I guess, keep on keeping on and not let it bother you. You're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. That's fine.
Well, isn't it funny that it ends up being this like likability contest? Because as much as it is CV based, and certainly that's going to filter through a lot of people who actually get to interviews, at the end of the day, there is a panel of people who make a subjective decision about you versus somebody else. And we give that so much power in terms of our professional capabilities. You know, the fact that you weren't the most liked candidate by this particular head of unit doesn't actually speak to your competence or your being the best person to do the job. I'm not saying you are the best person to do the job, but that's the connection we make. We're like, I wasn't the first pick, or I wasn't picked at all. And then we think that is reflecting something about our competence or something about our professional lives, when there's a component of likability that's subjective. You can't be liked by all the head of units because they all have very different opinions. You know, like 8 of them are going to pick Christine, and then like 4 of them are going to hate Christine. And there's no level of competence that you can get to that's going to eradicate that.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I think is really important to say here, and something I do talk about in the YouTube series that I've made, is about research. Now, what I didn't understand as I went through my training, because I think I put a lot of emphasis on clinical experience, clinical ability, clinical acumen, that type of thing. When I finished my training, I realized that the human value I had as I was going through that interview circuit, they were looking at me and saying, is this person going to bring my PhD to life in future? And I didn't realize that at the time. Like, I knew that I was supposed to do a PhD. That was what was taught to us. You know, it was basically, there was this culture where they said, you have to do a PhD or you'll never get a job. Like, that was being said to me, but I didn't really have the cognizance of how that affected my human value as an employee doing a clinical job. I was thinking, well, if I just show up and do a great job, then surely that's going to be valuable to you. But that seemed to be less of an emphasis, because I think they felt like that was a given. Whereas your ability to get publications and research was more the value that they wanted from you, even irrespective of whether you were clinically good or not. I think that's just how they place emphasis. And that was something I didn't understand. So something that I really like to empower younger doctors in training with. And what I talk about in that part 2 of the series is how to talk about research, whether you like it or you don't like it. I highly recommend that you find a way to talk about research that lights you up, like a potential research interest. Or even if you do like research, make sure that when you talk about it, you're talking about how your research will change the world. How would you like to impact the world? Like, take it extra, take it bigger. And I give you all sorts of strategies in the video if you do want to check that out, as how to express yourself. But I think that is one of the key things, certainly in Australian hospitals, that is going to help you get jobs is how you talk about research, not just how you talk about yourself and the clinical aspects, your clinical strengths.
That's so important, because that's not something that I knew about either, that research was so fundamental. Like I thought that people who were staying back to do like the honours year in uni, I did an MBBS, so you have an option to take an extra year and do honours. And I was just like, I don't care about having an honours at the end of my letters. I don't care about that. I'm not going to do that. And I didn't realise that research was a significant part of, job selection. And even to the point of like, thinking about advanced training and consultant positions, that the perspective is actually of a professor whose work is, in you being a bit of a research machine too. Like I didn't have that insight. So that's just so valuable, because that in itself creates motivation. It's not necessarily like, when I think about that, I'm not like, I would prefer to not do research. I prefer to have like, I'm more of like a human interaction kind of doctor, and research doesn't particularly excite me. However, in the context of research being something that would help me get the job in the centre that provides the level of patient care that I really value, suddenly I actually have motivation to do research, because I'm like, gosh, I'm willing to do the research if it means that I get to work in this centre or in this job or whatever. So I can quickly find a very genuine way of actually having a desire to do research just by knowing that sort of relationship that you've given us. Whereas otherwise it would just be me saying like, yeah, I could do some research, sure, why not? That would be like the most genuine thing. Or to be like, yeah, if I found an interesting enough project, obviously I wouldn't say this, but that would be genuine for me. Like only if I found a project that was interesting enough and impactful enough from my personal perspective, in terms of what I think are important issues in the world that we should put all our resources in, then I would do the research. But then it's a matter of also doing all the work to find who you can do that research with, and that's a lot on top of your clinical abilities. So that's just such a valuable, again, this insight and this strategy that you can give us, because you have that perspective that you just can't have, especially if you don't have a line of doctors in your family who have done it before, who can tell you, hey, this is how the system works. Play along with the system, otherwise you'll be punished.
Yes, and I feel like I missed that memo. I don't have a medical family at all. And what I've noticed in Australia, actually, and I'm sure other parts of the world are doing this as well, is that there seems to be some memo that's distributed that I missed, that's do a Masters of Public Health and you will step into jobs. And to be honest, it does help. If you're doing the Masters of Public Health strategy, it really, really does help you get a job, or a Masters in anything. Masters, they love that. But what I found, that when I was interviewing people for like nephrology training posts who had done a Masters in Public Health, what I found really disheartening was when I went to ask them, so what do you want to do with this Masters in Public Health? Expecting them to say something like, save the planet with amazing public health research. And what I found was that they just appeared like dead inside, eyes glazed over. They were not lit up by this at all. So it was clear to me they had just done that to tick a box, which I find incredibly sad. Don't get me wrong, it still gives them a ticked box and they'll still do really well from that. But how to set, if you've got two people with a Masters in Public Health, the way to set yourself apart in that scenario is to go that level up and be like, this is why, and I'm going to do this research and find something to say. You don't have to be married to what you say in an interview, but tune into something sparkly and authentically connect with it and talk about it. It will be so contagious. Yeah.
It's such good work to actually do for yourself too, because just to use the term rat race, you get in this rat race and you're working ridiculous hours. Like, I'm just going to take the MedReg perspective. As a BPT, you're working ridiculous hours and erratic hours. You are tired, and you might have very genuine reasons for doing that master's that you just locked in the bag years ago, but you actually do have a genuine interest in public health, and you did have a plan at the time, but it's not in your immediate radar of anything that you're going to do with it. And same with research. Like for me, I probably would enjoy a lot of research, but it just wasn't a priority for me during my BPT years. I didn't want to tip that far off balance to be putting that extra stuff on my plate. However, just taking a bit of time, a couple of hours every so often to tune into that stuff. I wouldn't say just before the interview, right? But like in the months before that, you need 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, a bit of time to just dream and really think bigger picture instead of what you would understandably do, which, you know, I completely empathize. You're just completely consumed by just the sheer workload and then the extra presentations and whatever you have to do with that in your hours outside as well. I think it would be really valuable to tap into that for yourself and reflect on that yourself in just these small chunks of time, but over a longer period, so you could come up with a really genuine answer that actually does inspire you. Because I think for a lot of us, we do really want to change the world. We do want that. But gosh, you just step so easily out of that mindset. You forget that when you're tired and overworked and just trying to get through the next shift and do your admissions a bit faster.
That is such good advice, such good advice. And I think that's also, even when it comes to the more basic interview questions, just thinking about your strengths and your weaknesses and things, or why do you want to do such and such a specialty? Like sometimes you can be so frazzled that you're like, well, I don't want to be a doctor today, so it's really hard for me to think about why I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So it's such good advice to be able to somehow find space to tune into a happier version of yourself.
Not like in the couple weeks before you're stressed out with the interviews, right? Like for my clients, I need to work hard with them to get them out of the like day-to-day mindset of like how hard life is. And it's mainly because they work with me and I actually hold that space for them and I force them into that space of the bigger picture and what you actually care about. But that's not an easy thing to do by yourself when you're tired. And so I wouldn't rely or force yourself to try and do that like 2 weeks before the interview and come up with some great answer. Like for me in my personal life too, it's when I get into that space, it's really big and beautiful and inspiring and fantastic. It's genuinely really energizing, but I need to purposefully do it. And it's a very iterative process. I don't get the answers the first time I do it. It's this iterative, open one door and then you see the next door and the next door. And I think it has to be that mechanical when you're so overworked and tired and under so much pressure. Carving out that time for yourself months and months before is not only strategic, but it actually makes you feel a lot better when you get to jump into that space of like, oh, this is what I love. This is what matters to me. This is where I'm going. This is why this is all worth it.
Yes, and believing it. I don't know if you want to like write like a little, in those moments, write exactly what you're talking about, your dream, your vision for yourself, your ideal life when you finish this hideous thing called being a doctor in training, and what's your life going to look like, and then you have to believe you can achieve it. If you only had that and then you took that energy into your cover letter writing in an interview, it's going to come across. I think that stuff comes out just in the words you would choose, in the atmosphere that you would generate. It would really make someone stand out to me. And there's usually a lot of uniqueness in there, which is another thing that helps people stand out, is that not everyone wants the exact same life. We're not all doing, even in one specialty, there's different like versions of the specialty and subspecialties and different whys. And why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to do that? Like there's lots of unique experiences that you could tap into that have led you to that place where that is the week you're designing, what's important to you, your value set, and that will also help you to shine. I think that unique part is going to make you different, and it's going to, authenticity, I believe, goes for country miles. It really does, within reason. Also, I am not an advocate for complete authenticity in interviews, just to say that out loud.
You don't want me to tell them that I'd rather not do research?
No, I do not. Do you know a really funny story? I was in an interview once and it was a cracking question that I hadn't prepared for. It was Western Health, and they asked me, if you had a superpower, what would it be, right? And I was in authenticity mode, and do you know, everyone else on the circuit said something like healing powers, and that would have been great. Except in the moment, all I could think of was like, I really want to be invisible. And the reason I wanted to be invisible was because being a renal reg was a bit of a time, and I really did want to be invisible. And I thought, what a great superpower. Then once I'd said it, I was like, I can't really tell them the real reason for that. So I was like, I'm super nosy. Let's make this end. And then I came out and realised everyone else had these brilliant superpowers where they were the best doctor ever, and I just wanted to hide in a cupboard type thing. So authenticity is not always good. I definitely didn't get the job at Western Health. I'm sure they had a laugh when I left the room. Yeah, Beck. Been there.
I really wish I had like my past interviews recorded. I'd love to just see the stuff I was saying, or would I love to? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting space to be in. And I just think that's why, as you say, tuning in and that authenticity and really getting genuinely into the place of this is what I want in life, even if it's 10 years away, even if it's not possible now, getting out of your current life and getting into that, I feel like that's the only way you'll be able to answer those. Well, it's the most surefire way that you'll answer a question that doesn't actually say the undertones of, I'm exhausted and burnt out, I just want to sleep. Which is true, but it doesn't make you a worse doctor. But it's going to sound like you are, you know? It's like...
Yeah, it's not inspiring to see a trainee who looks dead inside, even though we can all relate to being that trainee. It's not okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked about tuning into your true north, understanding yourself and being able to go after that unapologetically. So whether that is the pathway of least resistance, provided it feels good to you, or going for that competitive job and just not letting anyone stand in your way, finding out what you need to do, go to Professor such and such, find out the path, make yourself known to Professor such and such around the place, make sure that people know who you are, and then I guess tuning into your unique life, what you want to design for yourself, who you want to be in future, definitely finding a way to talk about research authentically. Have I missed anything? What else? Other strategies from self-doubt coach extraordinaire?
I think it's a beautiful summary, sprinkled with heaps of strategy as well. Thank you so much for sharing those little bits and pieces about the strategy. For me, it just warms my heart to think that this is shared to a wider audience of people. I think we assume that people know this, and because we assume, people miss out. But, you know, I certainly didn't know this stuff when I was just starting out as well, you know, so it's really helpful to have those strategies, and I'm sure lots of people will really appreciate that as well. And from my perspective, I think I just really want to echo, you know, not counting yourself out, as you say, because it's competitive and therefore ... it's not for you. But then also we have this tendency as people who have decided to be a doctor, which everybody told you was competitive, we have this tendency to think that doing the hard thing is the right thing. Anything less than the hard thing, in this case the competitive thing, is less than, or almost like unethical or immoral, like you're lazy or you didn't try hard enough, you didn't reach your potential. And that's just such a fallacy. Oh, and this is the perfect time. If you could please just tell us, to end, the story about the two people that you know who didn't end up on the path they planned, but it ended up really well. Because I just think, you know, we underestimate our ability to be happy, we underestimate our resilience and resourcefulness, and if we just believe that the hardest thing is the best thing, we can do ourselves such a disservice. And that's been a really hard lesson for me to learn. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I'd love to hear the other side, just to open my mind, open everyone's mind about what is beyond this one thing that we can be fixated on.
Yes, absolute glory stories. So I can think of two examples, and the first one is someone who was in my study group for the clinical exam, and I absolutely loved this person. She was phenomenal, right? Phenomenal. You'd let her look after your family members, just a superstar, right? And we both wanted to do nephrology, and I got on the program and she didn't, and that was a complete mystery to me. I don't know why. It didn't seem right to me. She should have got on the program. And then she did some research and tried again the next year and didn't get on the program. And again, I remain completely confused. But then she didn't apply the next year. She kept going in Gen Med training. And then I remember I bumped into her. I got my consultant job at the hospital I work at now, and I bumped into her outside, and it was such a beautiful little reunion. But I was like, oh, what are you up to? Like, what's happening? And she had stepped into a 1.0 Gen Med full-time permanent position at a massive tertiary centre. And like, meanwhile, everyone who just did nephrology training, we're all scrambling, right? We're scrambling. People are trying to do PhDs to get fractions. You know, I was lucky enough to get a fraction, like, but we're all scrambling for these jobs, right? That don't even exist. And she walked it into 1.0. She was happier than ever. She loved what she did. She was obviously valued and just kicking goals. So I see that story as she actually won. She got something arguably better than a lot of people who'd gotten into the program, and she was so happy and abundant. So that feels like it was actually the right path for her in the end, which is just beautiful, and I just love that for her. And then the other one was another friend who had really wanted to get into cardiology training, and again did all the things, tried to do the research, just tried and just kept hitting this wall of rejection. And then someone said to him, it was like a light bulb moment. They were like, do you know you can still do cardiology without being a cardiologist? And it was like, oh my goodness, that's correct. So what he ended up doing was doing gen med training, but with a sort of interest in cardiology, did an echo course, is super well known for his cardiology know-how, practices cardiology type medicine, goes to those clinics as a gen med physician. And so it just feels like everyone puts these rules on us and they're not real. Like, they're always being broken, and there's always a different way to get to a really fulfilling career. And again, arguably, that person's doing way better. They've got a lot of work and they have more job opportunities, like having gen med and cardiology, right? So it's really beautiful. So I think sometimes if we don't get onto the program, we think there's something less than about us. But I guess I'm here to tell you that, you know, it doesn't mean a single thing, and you can still carve out a career that really brings you joy and fulfills you and tickles your interest, whatever that might be.
I wholeheartedly believe that. Every time one of my clients says, oh, I just don't know what specialty to do, this comes up a lot. And then we work through options and we go all the way, like we zoom out, we zoom in, do everything. And, you know, at the end of the day, this person is just, every single person, all of my clients are so resourceful. And if you take yourself to that place, the worst case scenario even, or as in like, say you picked the wrong thing in your present thinking, if you then ask them, what would you do in that scenario to make it work? They've always got answers. You know, they talk about, you know, what if you decided that you wouldn't spend any more years applying for cardiology, and you would do gen med, then what? How would you make it work? And this person will be like, oh, well, I could, now I can work like in any location I want, and I can specialize, like I can go and do extra training in this, and I can work in these clinics, and I can do this much time with this. Like, you know, people come up with these answers, but we don't allow ourselves to consider anything less than this one pathway that we're fixated on for usually arbitrary reasons. You know, it's usually not because I could never part with the nephron, I would not be okay, I would simply die. It's just because we're like, you know, we've just decided we find it really interesting and that's what we want to do, but we forget that, you know, there's so many other things that we're great at and that we actually enjoy. And when you like throw in rejection or somebody telling that you can't have it, that's an extra layer of pain that makes you feel like something's going really wrong that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, maybe I'm philosophical about this as well, but I feel like anything that's ever happened that's been meant for me in life has felt, not that it wasn't hard work to get there, but there's been an ease to it in the end. Like, there's been a sort of an ease, whereas things that were definitely not meant for me, there were walls and it felt very uphill. And if I'd kept going against that grain, you can't keep going against the grain, but it does feel sometimes like a sign, like sometimes that there's actually something better. It's usually something better, but I think that's part of tuning in to your gut feel as well. Like, why am I hitting this wall? And is there, like, as you say, is there another reality that maybe I'd be more suited to as well? It's not always a bad thing, but it can feel like that at the time.
But you are so good at that, whereas a lot of us, we have gotten through training through suppressing our emotions and totally losing touch with what we want. And I think my worry with medical training is it's such a long time span. You can keep your head down and focus on this one career path, and you don't come up until you're like mid-late 30s, and then a big chunk of your life is done. You're like, oh, what happened? What do I want? Whereas when you're able to have that approach where you can actually tune in and genuinely, without fear, ask what you want each time, and ask, is this a good thing? This is a bad thing? Should I let this go? Should I push further on this? You actually give yourself an opportunity to, have those years accumulate to what you want. And I really think that that's an amazing skill that you've built that a lot of us unintentionally decommission, because we think that if we just work harder and we grit through it, that's the path to success.
Yeah, but I don't think that you're going to find many people saying, just follow your true north. That's quite strange. I've had that career advice from one person who I just love to bits, who's Professor Michelle Leach at Monash. She'll always just tell you to go and follow your true north, and she's the only person, but she's the wisest person, and it's so correct. So she didn't give me any advice apart from just tune in and do what feels good. But no one else gave me that advice. She was the very first person in my whole career. So now I feel like I need to domino effect that.
Imagine if every time you were like, I want to do this specialty, and instead of the response being, oh, it's very competitive. Imagine if you had a Michelle Leach and every person was like, okay, just follow your true north. Just make sure you're following your true north. Oh, how different would that be if you had that moment of like, it is what I want. Or like, no, I actually just saw that person doing it and I just assumed that everything, they were happy. Or, I wish there was more of that dialogue of like, you can trust yourself. Just listen to what you want, ask yourself what you want, and then follow that. You're going to be okay, and you're going to create good things, whatever you do. So, I'm a fan.
Yeah. I know, she's like my idol. I love her so much.
So wonderful.
And I guess, for you guys listening, if you do have any questions about this, I know that Beck has some awesome content on this on YouTube as well in terms of choosing a specialty, but if you had any questions about the interview or cover letters or I guess prickly parts of job application and self-doubt that comes up, we would love to hear from you, and you can leave those questions in the comments below and we will try to get back to you for sure.
Yeah, take everything you can from Christine's brain, guys. This is a special opportunity. All right, my beautiful friends, we'll see you next time.
See ya. Bye.
I've been waiting all my life for something. I've been down the darkest roads and up in